Hello everyone, this is Dr. Ilyas from the Department of Education, Hazara University, Mansehra. Conclusion is an important part of most research reports, including research reports that students write at the end of their research that they conduct for the purpose of producing a research thesis. Despite its importance and despite the fact that it is an essential part of the research report, the research thesis, and the research papers, some students and junior researchers find it challenging how to write an effective research conclusion. So this brief presentation is aimed at those students, research students, and junior researchers. So we will discuss the what and how, or the definition and the process of writing a research conclusion. So let us first begin with a general definition of what a conclusion could be. Well, generally it is the final part of a research report that is aimed at giving an overall gist of the research process and outcomes. So although in this particular part, in the conclusion part, there are elements of the what, why, and how of the research study, which actually means that there might be there is actually mention of what the study was about and why was the study conducted, or the rationale of the study, and then how was the study conducted. But the focus of the conclusion section actually should be on the so what of the process. So what we get at the end of this particular research process or this particular research product. Finding an answer to this question is something that is the very aim of the conclusion part of the research report. So what actually does all this mean in terms of theoretical and practical implications of the research findings? Generally, the conclusion is to get to the implications, to describe and discuss and present the implications of the research in terms of the theory, the addition that it has made to theory, or to the practical implications of the research process. So now we move on to the how of it. So how should conclusion be written? Or in other words, what is the structure of the conclusion? Well, there is some flexibility and some variation in the structure and content of the conclusion, although the essence conclusion should be the same thing. But there is some flexibility and variation in the structure if we look at the conclusions of various research papers published in research journals, or if we look at theses that are produced by students of different universities, we see that in essence the conclusions are quite similar, but in terms of structure and content there is some level of variation over there. So in terms of structure, conclusions could be shorter, such as they might vary from one paragraph to a few paragraphs. This is especially the case with conclusions of the research papers, because generally in a research paper we don't have a lot of space. We have to cover the whole research paper in a few thousand words, and so that's why generally in research papers the conclusion part is shorter. In some cases there are longer conclusions, and longer conclusions mean that these conclusions might consist of several paragraphs or even pages. And in many research theses, a whole chapter is actually dedicated to the conclusion part. And so in the case of research theses, we will see that conclusions will be longer in terms of structure, and they might they might consist of several paragraphs or several pages, or even whole chapter. Then the type of research is also a factor that will play its role in the design and structure and content of our conclusion. So generally, for example, there are quantitative research studies. I'm specifically talking about conclusion in social science research reports. So, and then there are qualitative research studies, and then there are mixed method research studies. For example, in quantitative research studies, conclusions could be in the form of numbering or points. And in more qualitative type of research reports, conclusions might be generally in the form of paragraphs, and in terms of a number of pages. So these are the factors. The very nature of the research type might also play its role in how we will actually develop and write or structure the conclusion of the research study. Then the content. In terms of content as well, there is a good deal of variation. And generally, in terms of content, this actually means what should be made part of the conclusion. There are some basic questions, the questions of what, how, and so what of the research. That actually means what were generally in the content. We need to refer back to the objectives of the research or the research questions. Then the research methodology. So a brief recapitulation of the research methodology is also something that might be made part of the conclusion. And then the main findings. So the content, in terms of content, these are some of the factors that might be included. Again, it will depend on the space that is available to the researcher for writing the conclusion. If the conclusions are for research papers, which means if the conclusions are shorter, we might skip some of these, for example, skipping a lot of background, skipping maybe objectives or research questions, and focusing on conclusions based on our findings. And in larger reports, we might include more of these aspects of the conclusion. Then implications of the findings for theory and practice. So what were our main findings, and what do these findings imply in terms of the theory revolving around this particular topic, or what implications do our findings have for practice, which means like in the practical field. So these three questions are important questions that can help us structuring our conclusion in terms of the content. Question one is, what do these findings mean to us in terms of our understanding regarding the issue? So you have come across findings. Now, what do these findings mean to you as a researcher in terms of understanding the concept that you are exploring? Similarly, what is the theoretical and or practical significance of our findings? This is also something. An answer to these questions, to this kind of question, will also be a kind of part of the conclusion section. And then, what has the study added to the theory of the topic or issue? So how has, or in what ways has this particular study added to the theory related to the topic that you have explored or to the issue? And so overall, the question of so what is very important in terms of developing our conclusion. And this actually means towards the end of maybe a recapitulation of your objectives, research questions, and the research methodology, and an analysis and description of the main findings. At the end of it, you actually give an overall conclusion of the conclusion itself. And so what question is very important in order to give a useful conclusion to the conclusion itself. And so how can you do it? The how will also be partially answered by actually looking at how other quality research thesis produced in good universities could be explored as examples. And so research students might need to study research thesis, especially the conclusion parts of the research thesis that are available on the websites of those universities. Similarly, those who want to write good conclusions, effective conclusions of the research papers, one way of doing that is actually going to the sites of the research journals where they want to publish their research papers and download some of the research papers or read some of the research papers, and especially the conclusion sections of the research paper. That will also give them like good examples to follow of how to actually write their conclusions. So to summarize, the conclusion is an important or rather a kind of essential part of the research report, and the conclusion sections vary in terms of the structure and content, and also in terms of the requirements of particular research journals or research paper formats, and also in terms of the universities where where you are actually conducting your research. So they might also have their own structures. And so then overall there is this variation over there. So there is contextualization. You need to contextualize your research conclusion in line with the requirements of the particular research journals or universities or departments where you are actually conducting your research thesis. Thank you very much for your time. Take care. Bye.